Joining me now, we have John Kirby, MS Now national security analyst. He is also a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral and former White House National Security Communications Advisor. And Robert Malley, former special U.S. envoy for Iran, former lead negotiator on the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known as the JCPOA, and co-author of the book Tomorrow is Yesterday, Life, Death, and the Pursuit of Peace in Israel-Palestine. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have both of you here. Admiral, we're going to get to some of the presidential security concerns that Jake was mentioning in just a few minutes, but the president today said that Iran agreed to a deal yesterday, then turned around and attacked a civilian vessel. I asked this of another former CIA officer in the last hour, but could there be two factions working against each other, both within Iran?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would argue there's probably more than two factions that are not all working in the same, towards the same ends and with the same measure of enthusiasm or honesty. The Iranian regime is not monolithic, and the IRGC now, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, has more power than they did before, and they don't have perfect command and control over their commanders, who often make decisions not necessarily checking in with headquarters. So it doesn't surprise me that if, in fact, it's true that a deal had been reached, that then shortly after that, some of the hardliners decided to pop off a drone and hit a ship. Doesn't surprise me at all.
Robert, were rival factions a consideration when you were negotiating the JCPOA?
I mean, I think rival factions are a consideration in many systems. It's true in the case of Iran. It's true in, I'd say right now, there's rival factions in the White House, rival factions in President Trump's head. So this has been a very dysfunctional negotiation. The U.S. and Israel has killed the Iranian leadership. Very hard for them to then have a coherent, institutionalized process. For the most part, they seem to have made decisions, stuck to them. I wouldn't take what President Trump says at face value. Not much of what he says is worthy of that. But when he says that they reached a perfect deal yesterday, we've heard that a dozen times now since the war began. Perfect deal is often in his imagination. The reality is what we're seeing on the ground. And as I say, there may be divisions in Iran. The divisions in President Trump's own mindset.
So, Robert, Iranian officials are pointing to a clause in the Memorandum of Understanding that appears to give Iran control of the strait for at least 60 days. Now, the Wall Street Journal is calling it a poorly worded clause. Did American negotiators miss this during the drafting phase?
I mean, hard to say. It is an extraordinarily sloppily drafted document. I mean, you could drive holes in the interpretations of both sides. You could read any clause and come up with very, very different, sometimes contradictory interpretations. Article 5, which is the one you're referring to, is a case in point, because I think Iran will stress the part that says that it is basically managing the free flow or the flow of ships in the strait, and the U.S. will focus on the fact that it says it is a free-flowing, unhindered passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So each side is going to grab onto something. I think the real question, A, is why it was drafted this way, and B, were there any communications, direct or indirect, between the U.S. and Iran that clarified it, and that now one side or the other is not respecting.
So, Admiral, on that report about Iran working to rebuild its nuclear capability, how concerning is that if it's plausible, and what level of escalation could potentially follow if it's accurate?
Certainly deeply worrying if it's true, and I have no reason to doubt that reporting at this point. I mean, there's no question that the regime would like to retain nuclear weapons capability, or at least to make sure that they have the ability to restore that. I mean, that's a very significant negotiating card for them, as is control over the strait. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't trying to find a way to reconstitute that material or to try to gain possession of it as a leveraging point in the negotiations. The regime wants nothing more than survival, and they want to make sure that they have the leverage over the Trump administration to do that. They've never abandoned their desire to develop nuclear weapons, despite the fact that they've said that they want to do that. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. And yes, that would be deeply concerning to the region. And you have to think about what Israel is going to be thinking about as they hear these reports too, because they have a stake in this conflict as well. A nuclear-armed Iran is existential to them, and I don't suspect that the Israeli government will sit by here idly and watch as they try to make this play out just at the negotiating table.
Robert, how about you? Your assessment of the report that Iran is actively trying to rebuild its nuclear sites?
I take every intelligence now that is being leaked with a huge, huge grain of salt. Obviously, you have people who have an interest in saying that Iran is trying to reconstitute its program. I obviously have no independent evidence of it, just as there are people who are saying that Iran is plotting to kill President Trump. That could serve the interest of those who want to resume the war. I think right now what's really at stake is what the memorandum of understanding was about, which is opening the Strait of Hormuz. For Iran, it is absolutely critical to retain some form of domination, of sovereignty, of control over the strait, because that's their leverage. That's the only concrete leverage they believe they have today. A nuclear weapon, if it ever were to be developed, would take a very long time, would be detected almost immediately by the US or Israel. So I have some doubts about that report. Again, I have no independent evidence one way or the other. I would just caution people listening to this. Remember, there are forces everywhere that have a stake in resuming the war and bringing it to a different outcome.
Let me ask you, Robert, about the president saying that the nuclear dust, anything that is left over of enriched uranium, it's been buried so deeply by the U.S. strikes that Iran can't even get to it. He has said that the United States is the only one that has the power, the tools, the equipment to dig it out. Do you believe that?
I mean, I suspect that if Iran really wanted to, it could dig it out. I mean, it's technically complicated, but I suspect they could do it. The real question is, would they take the risk of engaging in that effort, knowing that the U.S. and Israel, as I said, have their eyes and ears focused on that area, and therefore they'd be exposing themselves to immediate military attack. So I think it's something that at some point they may well want to do if they don't have a deal that disposes of it. But right now, for them to take that step, I kind of think that they'd be a little more cautious than that, and they'd find other instruments, like attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, to assert the leverage that they believe they need to have at the negotiating table.
Admiral, how long can this tit for tat, can the difficulties in the Strait of Hormuz continue without potentially causing gas prices to go up exponentially and economic collapse and all these things that have kept this White House up at night?
We're already seeing that effect economically around the world. I think the Iranians can continue to hit its ships for quite some time. Now, I know U.S. Central Command is going after a lot more of their targets over the last several days, going after command and control, logistics, missile defenses, and even some launch capabilities. But it's clear that the Iranians still have the ability to threaten ships in and around the strait. And we need to remember that they can do that through fear alone. Just radio harassment is enough to sometimes stop shipping companies from wanting to go forward through the strait in either direction. So this could go on for quite some time. I think what you're going to start to see, in fact, I think you're seeing it today, is the end of the tit for tat. The strikes that launched today, they didn't advertise them as retaliatory strikes. I think they are beginning now to ramp up their bombing campaign and just going on the offensive here because the Iranians have proven to be so unreliable at the negotiating table.
But going on a bombing campaign, what is even left to bomb? I mean, it's been obliterated, so it's been said. We had 140 sites bombed just the other night. What's left?
Well, clearly the Iranians still have military capability, Alex. I mean, they're still able to launch drones and missiles, and they still have the ability to reconstitute some of that capability going forward. Now, obviously, a lot of it's gone, but they still have some of it. But you're also, as I said, you're starting to see the military now shift a little bit more towards logistics sustainment targets and even going after infrastructure. They hit some railways, dual-use railways just a couple of days ago. So I think you're going to see a little bit more of that as well. This will be civilian infrastructure, or primarily used for civilian purposes, but also used for military purposes, which makes it legal to go after. And I think they're going to try to do that. I think you'll also see more economically related targets because that is the one area where when they do hit Iran and the regime, though it is not a monolith, they do tend to react to that, and they're sensitive to that, to economic targets. And I wouldn't be surprised if those are on the list going forward.
You know, Robert, the Wall Street Journal reports that Iran has hatched a new plot to assassinate President Trump, and this is according to Israeli intelligence. And then the president has fired back with, of course, his own bombing threats should anything like that happen. Did President Obama experience similar levels of frustration during his administration's negotiations with Iran? And how did he manage to avoid being targeted for assassination?